Oh, hey! Just making sure I get my PPE, my personal protection. Get my glasses on. That way, on today's project, I don't get anything in my eyes. You only get one pair. Gloves. Take care of your hands. Use them every day. Today we're going to work on a lawnmower. Guy gave it to me, said doesn't work. Let's see if we can get it working. Let's go.
Sorry for the audio, guys. I was recording on an extremely windy day, and here we are. So let's go over what's going on here in the video. I'm looking at the drive cable. It was stuck. So the cable actually actuates a lever down by the carburetor, and I'll show that lever later on in the video. That actually hits a kill switch. So if the lever was stuck, the kill switch was always on. So I took some WD-40 and kept feeding it into the tube where the cable rides in. And I kept doing that overnight. Multiple times I would go ahead and feed some more oil down there just so it could break up the rust that was in that tube. And eventually I was able to, as you can see here, get that cable free. And it is now moving freely. There is still rust on that cable, and I do recommend that cable does be replaced. But to get this lawnmower working today, and hopefully if he stores this in the garage, this could continue to work as long as he just keeps oiling up the cable. So I went ahead and put some starter fluid in to kind of see if I can get it to turn over. After I saw that it would run, I knew we had a clogged main jet on the carburetor. I'm going through and just checking some other items. You always want to make sure that you have oil in your engine before you run it. I should have checked that first, but I didn't. But before I continued to try and get it running and started, I went ahead and checked that oil level, and it was really dirty, and it does need an oil change. As you can see, it was pretty black. I recommend at least changing your oil every year at minimum, as well as your air filter. Depending on the environment you live in, if you have a lot of dust in your area, you may have to change that air filter a lot more. So check it regularly because if that gets clogged up, your engine is not going to run well, and or it's going to have trouble starting. So now that I have that throttle cable moving and I've cleared the path all the way through that tube, I want to go ahead and throw a little bit more WD-40 down in there so it can actually pass all the way through. And as I continue to work that cable, uh, it will just move freer and freer as I continue to work on this lawnmower. So I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of gas in there, and I've decided that I do, I'm good. So I'm going to go ahead and put that cap back on, and I'm going to go ahead and take this top cover off. So I'm going to remove all the screws, remove that top pull. So I've never taken one of these specific lawnmowers apart before. They're all pretty similar, but they all come apart a little differently. So what I'm doing is inspecting the top of the lawnmower to see all the screws and fasteners that I would have to remove in order to take it apart. So I realized there's only one holding the top cover off for the pull cord. Go ahead and pop that off. And then now I see I have 3 bolts or nuts that I need to take off so that I can actually pull or take that pull assembly off. And as you see there, that just came right off after removing those. So now that I have that off, the gas tank and cover should just pop right off, which I did. And now I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get the carburetor off so that I can go through it and clean it. So I'm just looking at all my hoses and springs and all the rods that need to come off for the governor. checking to make sure that I have gas coming from my gas tank through the gas line into my float bowl. Uh, it's just a good way to make sure that that's not the problem. As you could see, I could give it starter fluid. It'll run, but then it just wouldn't run off of its own gas. So it's just one of the steps you want to take to make sure that that's not the issue. And I figured out that when I removed the bowl or the bolt out of the bottom of the float bowl, gas came pouring out, and that tells me that I'm getting gas flowing all the way through to my carburetor, so that's not the issue. I can check that off the list. I went ahead and pulled the float bowl off, and I checked the float. So what the float does is as the bowl fills up with gas, it pushes on the float and will stop the gas from feeding into the carburetor. So I went ahead and turned my gas on with the float bowl off to validate that I do have gas coming through, and then when that float bowl goes up, the needle does stop the gas from flowing and it stops filling up my float bowl. That worked. So I know that wasn't the issue. So let's go ahead and remove the rest of the air assembly, take the two 10mm bolts out, and now I'm going to go ahead and throw the bottom bolt back in the bowl so that we don't accidentally damage our float or lose any parts. So let's go ahead and get these two 10mm off. We'll set them off to the side, and we'll start removing the rest of the parts so we can get that carburetor off. So I got the first piece off, set it off to the side, and then I have a gasket that I'm looking at as I'm pulling it off. It is pretty dirty, so we're going to have to clean that up. For now, I'll just take a rag and get some of the grime off of it. Looks like mud, but overall the gasket looks good. I'm inspecting it and I don't see any tears or anything wrong with it, so we won't need to replace that. Let's go ahead and get the bars off and springs off, and as you're doing this you want to pay attention to what goes where and which arm goes into which section so that you don't get those mixed up when you start to reassemble. So take lots of pictures. Again, it definitely helps make sure that you don't put something back incorrectly and that everything will work as it's supposed to. And I do struggle a little bit here to get this second bar off, but I do end up getting it off eventually, but I see that I am actually going to need to clamp my gas hose. All right, let's get a rag and go ahead and put it underneath the float bowl so that we can capture any gas in case it spills. I do want to make sure that the gas is turned off, and it is. Let's go ahead and remove the gas line off of the carburetor, which can be a pain sometimes, and this one was challenging because I didn't have much room to work with. So just some needle nose pliers, move the little spring clamp out of the way, and eventually I do get it off. Now that I've got the bars all pulled off the carb, I can go ahead and slide it off, and we can just take it over to the bench. Now that we've got it at the bench, I'm going to use my air hose and just blow off all the dirt and debris and grime that's on the top of this. It just keeps things a little cleaner. So let's go ahead and remove the bottom bolt, and we'll get the bowl removed and start inspecting inside of the carburetor. So down my main jet tube is pretty corroded, as I can see that the main jet is rusted. So I'll get a small flathead screwdriver and proceed to take that main jet out. Just being careful not to damage it, not to force it. I'm just going to slowly work at it until I get it broken free, and I do here get that free and am successful. So I do see a lot of grime and grit popping out of that main jet tube, which tells me that it was probably aiding in it's being clogged, but I did check the inside of that passage, inside of that jet, and it was completely clogged. So I'm using Chem Dip, which is a great carburetor cleaner. It comes with a little basket inside. I want to say I paid maybe $30 for that can. It could have been only $18. I don't remember. You can look at your local hardware store or your auto parts store. It's where I picked it up. I actually picked that up at AutoZone. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull all the parts of the carb off and throw them down in there, and I'm going to let them soak. You can let them soak anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes to an hour. It doesn't really matter. The longer you let it sit in there, the more work it's going to do and save you the physical labor of trying to clean it. So I let mine actually sit in there for around 20 minutes before I pulled it out, and it made things a lot easier. It ate away all the corrosion in the jet, which I'll show here later in the video, and did a lot of the cleanup for me. I went ahead and pulled my carb jet, all the pieces of the carburetor out of the chem dip, and I'm taking them in here, just some water, and rinsing them off, just to get the rest of the corrosion, any dirt or debris off of it, and just kind of rinsing off that chem dip. And I'm inspecting to see how well the chem dip did, and I was pretty impressed with how clean it got the jet. And I'm going to take it back to my bench and go ahead and dry everything off. Once I get everything out of the bath, what I'm doing here in the video is I'm checking the float to make sure it's actually floating. One of the things that can happen is your float can get a small crack in it. If it sits too long, sometimes the gasoline that's in it will eat a little hole in the float, and your float will sink, so it's not going to end up doing its job. We knew our float was good, but it's just a good way to double check it when you're working on, when you have it all pulled apart, just double check that float is floating. So here I'm taking a brass brush and just going through and cleaning off as much of the debris as I can see, and I'm inspecting the gasket here. So there's a gasket that runs around the edge where your bolt seals to the carburetor. You have to inspect that to make sure there's no cracks in it or tears in it, because then that means your lawnmower or your float bowl is going to leak. Take an air compressor and I blow out all the pathways in the carburetor. So this is a cool little trick that I saw another YouTuber do, where he takes Q-tips, checks them in his drill, and puts carburetor cleaner on them, and then just runs them in all the open areas that will fit to really polish and clean the inside of that pathway. Works great for that main jet tube. So I'm just using Q-tips, again, non-abrasive, just great little tools to clean, and I'm just wiping off any dirt I see or something that, it's the easy way to clean your carburetor. I'm just going to continue to work this Q-tip through the main jet area and just kind of polish it up a little bit and make sure it's good and clean. As you can see, the carburetor main jet tube was pretty dirty due to the color of that Q-tip when I pulled it out. So I'm taking another clean Q-tip here, and I just see some grime on the float. I'm going around just making sure it's as clean as possible before I reassemble, because I don't want any of that grime to break away and clog up that jet. So now that I've got everything clean, I'm just going to go in reverse and put everything back together. Drop my float needle back in, put the pin back in. And again, just everything that you do is just all in reverse. So that all went together nicely. The float's working as it should. So here I'm drying off the the bowl, and just making sure that I get as much of the grime off as possible, and making sure it's clean. Wiping the outside. I don't want to put it back better than I got it. So the best I can do with what I have to work with. So now I'm taking a brass brush here and just kind of getting down in the crevices and getting everything clean. I'm also getting on my float bowl bolts, making sure that all the rust and grime is off of those. Again, using my brass brush, and I get them pretty clean. They almost look new, which is nice. So that should go together much better. Now I'm inspecting that main jet after it comes out of the chem dip, and now I can see through it. So that chem dip actually ate away all the corrosion that was inside, which is its job, and it did a really good job doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and reseat this main jet, and I like to run my jets backwards before I screw them down, just so I don't accidentally cross thread. You'll see that the you'll feel that the threads will pop over a little bit and you'll be able to run them down. So again, got my bowl back on, putting all my bolts back in, and I'm going to reassemble everything. So I pull all the parts back together, got my fiber washers that are going to go on all my float bowl bolts. I've got my gasket, I got everything all cleaned and ready to be reassembled. And here I'm doing that. So I got my bolt back on, or my bowl back on the carburetor, and I'm just making sure it's in the right orientation because it does face a certain way to where you can access that diagonal bolt while it's on the lawnmower. So I'm getting my bottom bolt in, just snugging that up so it doesn't fall apart. And I'm not going super tight with this, I'm just snugging it. It does not need to be super tight. It just needs to be tight enough that it's not going to leak. So I got all my pieces back together and I'm going to reassemble the carb on the lawnmower. So as you see, I'm just going to go in reverse and put everything back together, making sure not to forget any parts. But as I do this, as you watch the last part of this video, I will say, unfortunately, the rest of this assembly got lost. For some reason, when I went to check my recording, it wasn't there. I'm not sure what happened. I did get my outro, which you'll see here in a minute, but yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to do the startup of the video or the lawnmower after I was done putting everything back together. But I will assure you, it ran much better. I mean, it made a huge difference cleaning this carburetor. The owner of this lawnmower will be very happy. And once he arrived, I pull started the lawnmower and it started first pull. And that's what he needed. That's what he needed, and that's what he was expecting. So I'm glad I was able to help him out and got this done. But with everything, it just takes a little work, and as long as you're patient and you're willing to put in the time, you can do this.
Hey, Steve did it. Lawnmower's fixed. Bad carburetor. Well, not bad, just needed a little love. Cleaned it out, we're good to go. Customer's gonna be happy. Remember, you can do this too. I did it, you can do it. Stay tuned for more videos. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, let you know when we post more stuff. We got more projects coming, more things to fix. Stay tuned.